Welcome to another installment of Yoga, Hype, and History. Today we're going to be talking about Tantra and Neo-tantra. Full disclosure, I'm a scholar of Tantra. This is my main field of research is on Tantra and the Tantras. And as we saw before, I work generally on magic. And a lot of the magic stuff that I work with is actually found in texts called Tantras. But the other word here is Neo-tantra. So when I say Neo, as I've said Neo-Vedanta and I've said Neo-Hinduism, the word means new. And the idea is that it's a sort of newfangled or reconceived modern version of something much older when we say something is Neo. So let's get into it today. And you will also be, so let's get going. Here we are. All right, so what is Tantra? Well, Tantra is a mode or dimension of Indian religions. It is found, or South Asian religions, it's found within Hinduism, Buddhism, and Jainism, but it's not the same in these three religions. It's Indic, but it's from India widely, from all over South Asia. It is widely said to be heterodox Hinduism or non-Vedic. When I say Vedic, I mean according to the oldest text in Hinduism called the Vedas. However, you'll see that when people are talking about Hinduism today and they say that something is Vedic, they just mean that it's orthodox or it's old. And I would argue that the majority of things that modern Hindus say about things being Vedic are actually not quite so Vedic at all. But when people say Vedic, they mean orthodox. So Tantra is often thought to be heterodox. Orthodox, like an orthodontist, is one who puts the teeth straight. Orthodox, dox as in doctrine, your doctrine is straight. So when I say heterodox, it means the doctrine is different. So Tantra is widely said to be heterodox Hinduism or non-Vedic Hinduism. But in fact, when I look at the Tantras, I see lots of Orthodox Hinduism. I see lots of Vedic rituals. I see passages from Veda texts. So Tantra, in fact, is not really heterodox because it's been the mainstream of Hinduism for about 1,000 years, from 600 to 1600. The majority of what was going on in Hinduism was tantric. And in fact, tantric pujas, like the rituals that you see in temples, most of those come out of the tantras. There's a lot of material that comes out of the tantras that is in fact not heterodox at all and is accepted as normative. So once again, if you look back to the scriptures, you'll see what's actually going on. And it's a bigger, more complicated picture than one would expect, just like as we keep seeing with yoga. All right. So Tantra is arguably even mainstream today because you have temple worships, home worships, the use of mantras that people say all the time, mudras or hand gestures, and so forth. And we're going to explore all of those today. So I always like to think of Tantra as being hyper ritual. There's like rituals about rituals on top of rituals. Think about those magic texts we looked at. It's just all ritual. So here are two great images that kind of help you figure out sort of the vibe of Tantra. On the left, you see, and this is, I think this is actually a Buddhist image. You see a Buddhist god and a Buddhist goddess, and they are in sexual congress. There's a lot of sex that comes in Tantra, but it's not as sexy as you'd think, as we'll find. And then on the right, you see this little diagram I dug up on the internet. And it says, Tantra me sapalta prapti ka mantra, the mantra for attaining whatever fruits one desires through Tantra. So mantra for success in Tantra is one way that that you could translate this out of the Hindi. So you have Tantra has like two aspects when people think about it. One, it's what they call there's a Sanskrit word for it, bubukshu, and that means it is, or bubuksha, that is the desire for enjoyment, the desire for success. You do Tantra to be successful and powerful and healthy, and your body is strong, you're a powerful person in general. And then there's also mumuksha, and one who does it is a mumukshu. Should have had that word on the slide. And that would be someone who's desiring of moksha or liberation. So you can see that there's this tension in all of tantras between whether someone's looking for liberation or whether a tantra is advocating liberation or they're advocating, potent personal development, spiritual enjoyments, and magical powers. That's a pretty constant thing. But within all of that, you'll see symbolisms that are very sexual. There are sexual and sometimes very violent symbolism behind all of these tantric sort of systems. So, like I said, Tantra is a hyper-ritual mode of religion that becomes prominent in the late medieval era of India. So, roughly from the 6th to the 13th century. Now, I said it was hyper-ritual. The rituals, and these rituals are physically acted out and accompanied by mantras. Now, what is a mantra? A mantra, and we remember we learned the one mantra in the Yoga Sutras was the mantra of the Lord of Yoga, Yogeshwara, and his mantra was Om. So you would practice meditating on him by going Om, 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 sounds kind of boring to me. But anyway, so a mantra can be a magic spell, or a mantra can be a prayer. Mantras at the earliest forms were hymns in the earliest of scriptures. And to the point that I'm bringing up mantras right now is because in the tantras, even in those magic tantras, you may remember, there's a lot of mantras. So some texts actually refer to tantra as the mantrayana. That means the vehicle of mantras. If you know a little bit about Buddhism, you have two schools of Buddhism, Mahayana and Hinayana, the great vehicle and the lower vehicle. Well, this is the mantrayana, the vehicle of mantras, the vehicle for learning mantras and using mantras and for gaining success through mantras. So, like I said, Tantra really gets started in the 6th century with a text called the Nishwasa Tantra. Its earliest texts are Shaiva, but we see that the Buddhists pick up Tantra and expand it quickly into very elaborate and intricate ritual systems that are thought to bring about liberation in the Buddhist context within one lifetime. So in general, when I'm talking about Tantra, I mean that Tantra is a style of thing done in temples that is done for temple worship, but Tantra is also the primary mode of scripture and practice in temple ritual. Puja, or ritual worship, is actually Tantra. Puja is from Tantra, the text called the Tantras, and the Puranas. But even the Puranas, in fact, these antiquary texts called Puranas, the old texts, those draw directly upon Tantra ideas. Tantra, in fact, incorporates a wide range of deities and practices that could be considered folk practices. So while the writers might have been Brahmin elites, in the Tantras, you see them observing rituals that people are doing in villages. You see them getting inspiration from materials that they wouldn't normally get. They pull from what you could even call the tantric firmament, this popular religion that was widespread all throughout India and quite diverse. And the Tantras were like, well, that stuff looks kind of cool. Let's bring it in there. Like I said, Tantra as a ritual form will use any ritual that they find useful. Okay. I don't think I need to talk too much about the historical context. But what I wanted to argue is that Tantra and yoga developed together. Now look at these pictures here. We have Shiva, who's the primary god within Tantras. On the left, you see a yogi figure who has a kundalini in his belly and all sorts of deities all throughout his body, along with mantras written upon him. And behind him, you'd see a number of yogis. So Tantra and yoga actually developed together. Hatha yoga gets started in the 1400s, but it's very much an extension of Tantra. So in Hatha yoga and in Tantra, you'll see that they're visualized body maps, the maps of the subtle body are pretty much identical. The visualized body can seem to be a network of channels or nadis, which also means river, networks, centers, veins, and consciousness and life force flow through those channels and veins, and you manipulate those forces in Tantra, and you manipulate it using your body through ritual. Hatha yoga goes even further and says by body positions and specific types of meditation and through the use of the body, one can actually gain realization through that. So yoga either seeks union with God or disunion with the world via meditative practices, in theory. But yoga practices, in fact, mostly cultivate superpowers and bodily perfection via mental and physical practices using the very body maps and technologies and ideas about the body and the soul that are found in the Tantras. Tantric practitioners in our sources, when you're reading in Tantras, they're often called yogis. So this term yogi is wide, obviously, but when I'm like reading a magic text, they'll say the yogi does this. And we'll find this throughout the Tantras. When a Tantra is describing a practice, the person who does the practice is often called a yogi. So big connection there. So Tantra is interesting because it sees bodies, or it sees deities as living within the body as well as outside of the body. Many rituals seek to experience this directly. Deities that one would conceive of as being on the outside are placed on the inside, so that I could install deities in every joint of my arms. Or other things that they'll visualize is they'll install pilgrimage routes. Like imagine if you had Walt Disney World, Mecca, Benares, and Paris all in your body, and then you imagined them in those bodies and imagine going in those places. Then in Tantra, theoretically, they would say that is the equivalent of actually going on a pilgrimage to all those places. Yes, I did say that Disney World is a pilgrimage place, because it is in the United States. Kind of nutty like that. Okay, so Tantra makes extensive use of visualization. What do I mean by visualization? Well, I mean, the way I like to think of visualization is if you imagine your head, inside your head is a TV screen. What you're doing is you're projecting on that TV screen something with your own brain. So you're actively visualizing, say, yourself as a deity, and then the deity doing specific things. Or you're actively visualizing a ritual being done in your head. Or you are visualizing, for instance, like in the Tibetan Buddhist tradition, you would imagine, you'd be sitting there meditating, you would imagine that your guru is in front of you and the guru is the same as the Buddha, and then you realize that you visualize yourself as the guru and then as the Buddha, and then you realize celestial deities and Buddhas above you, they'll be pouring energy within you. You're doing all of this mentally. So, when you're reading these texts, it's like, well, it'll just say this is happening, and this is happening. You're like, is it literally happening? No, you're visualizing it. One thing, an idea I like on this is a concept called the prescriptive imagination. So in the prescriptive imagination, that would be that you will create rituals that you do in your head and then never actually perform them. So in that manner, one can create all sorts of new ritual technologies, and you're not limited by the material world. So hence, another way that Tantra is able to, I wouldn't say transcend, but able to make use of the physical world and do more than you would think with the physical world. All right, most tantric rituals are in fact dualistic, so it believes man and God are different. There is a form of tantric non-duality, and in fact, when a lot of people talk about Tantra these days, they say that Tantra is identical to non-duality. Now, we heard that term Advaita before, which says that man and God are one. The only thing that separates them are illusion. Tantra would say that this very world is consciousness, which is God, which is slowed down for us to interact with it, but we are also that same consciousness as that same God. But most tantric rituals are dualistic. They write about a God outside of yourself that you interact with to get you to do things, to cause changes to yourself, to cause you to evolve, to affect magic powers or whatnot. So most tantric rituals and philosophy are in fact dualistic, arguing that there is a real world out there and that there are gods who are separate from man, which one can aspire to be like or to transact with. Some schools do posit an idea of non-duality, but these were in the minority despite how modern scholars write about non-duality in Indian religions. In tantric non-duality, all of life and the world and subjectivity is thought to be the play of consciousness. And it is the goal of life and the spiritual life to see oneself as essentially consciousness itself and to be at one with all the world. While these non-dualistic philosophies may have the grace of God or devotion to God causing realization, the vast majority of tantric practice is ritual. So again, if you're not doing ritual, you're not doing tantra. If you're just thinking through things, then you're doing something else. Ritual. It requires ritual. In fact, many practices that were originally tantra are now not considered tantra, such as puja worships, the types of worship you do in a temple or even in your home. Okay, for Indians and for Hindus in general, women are a problem. Go figure. Because women are in fact a source of power. So Shakti is the feminine energy of the universe. So some people talk about Shiva and Shakti. Shiva, the god, is Shiva, and Shakti is his wife. And their dynamic interplay or even their lovemaking is what generates the universe. In fact, there's a phrase that people will say often, the Hindus often say, they'll say, Shiva without Shakti is Shava. So Shiva, the god, the great god Shiva, without Shakti, his consort, his wife, is Shava, which means a corpse. So Shiva is thought to be like The wisdom and Shakti is thought, or the wisdom of the will, and Shakti is thought to be the energy that affects that energy of the will. They're worthless without one another being together. Okay, but like I said, women are a problem. They're a source of power. They are the Shakti, but yet sex with women or ejaculation leads to the loss of energy or virya, which is thought to make men age and eventually die. So where am I going with this? So there's a thing that they call Gupta Rog, the secret illness. The secret illness argues that excessive ejaculation causes men to become sick, lose their bodily energies, and to die young. This is the point where if a man dies young and he has a very young, very sexy wife, they'll say, oh, she made love to him too much and it killed him. So within this system, remember, we're in this system of the bodily hydraulics. Women are required because you need to have children and you need women in your life as a man. However, they are dangerous because they drain you. So in this sense, all women are effectively vampires. It's tricky, it's unfortunate, it's misogynist, but it's the way it is. Okay, it's important to remember in this that that in yoga and tantra, we'll see that the transmutation of semen causes immortality, spiritual development, and spiritual power, thereby the loss of those sexual fluids and that masculine energy causes death, degradation, age, and sadness. Okay, so when people talk about Tantra, they often talk about the 5 M's. Now, the 5 M's are meat, liquor, sexual congress, it's called Maituna, mudra, which is like parched kidney beans, we don't really know, and fish. So these are substances that are considered inherently impure and that proper Brahmins shouldn't consume them. Now, Tantra is weird. In some tantric rituals, not all, people talk like it's all, people will actually consume these things. They'll eat meat. They will consume liquor. I know the Tibetan Buddhist tradition is tantric. And when, like, I knew this Lama who was going to be giving a big empowerment and these teachings, and I got to sit in the room while he was getting himself ready. And the one thing I noticed he did is, and he's a monk, is he was eating raw meat. It was actually ground hamburger. It was in Michigan. And he was drinking liquor in order to consume those powerful substances to make his body capable of doing the rituals. Okay, so if these things are impure and you're consuming them, then they're transgressive. What is transgression? Transgression is doing what you don't want to do, or what you're not supposed to do, violating purity codes. Generally, transgression in religious studies is thought to be a thing, and when we're thinking about religion, it's thought to be a thing one does where you break the rules in order to find power or to find God within breaking the rules, if that makes sense. So mixing different castes, because the sex in Maituna and these 5 M's should not be with one's own wife or one's own consort. In fact, one statement says that you should be with someone of a different caste, and if the only person you can do this with as a male is your wife, then it's better to do it with your grandmother than your wife. Weird, right? Anyway, so the idea is you're doing a sexual action that you're not doing out of pure pleasure. You're doing it because it's wrong. And in that doing what is wrong and violating purity codes, people see, one, that those purity codes don't matter, and two, see that God is available in all things, even the things that are considered improper. Now, there's a problem with this whole argument. These are only really transgressed, like eating meat and drinking booze and having sex with other women. That's not a problem for, say, a kshatriya of the warrior class. It's a problem for a Brahmin priestly caste. For a kshatriya, having meat and booze and sex, that's not impure. That's fine. That's what they do. So what's going on with these substances? And I think this is a key point. These substances are inherently powerful. The reason why they are manipulated in rituals is not as much because you're purposely transgressing or violating taboos, but they are being used because they are inherently powerful. Meat makes you powerful. Booze makes you powerful. So these substances are used because they're dangerous and they're potent, and it's tantra. So you're trying to turbocharge everything. If you're doing a ritual, you want to make it bigger and wilder and more potent. How can you make it bigger, wilder, more potent than, add some sex and drugs and rock and roll? Okay, so one thing that I want you to remember here is that Tantra as opposed to Neo-tantra, which we'll talk about at the end of this lecture, is a sexualization of ritual, not a ritualization of sex. So they're not having the sexual act and doing a ritual around it. It's they are acting out the ritual through sex. So if a puja is an offering of clarified butter into a fire with a ladle, and you're doing that normally, in Tantra, the ladle would become the penis, the semen would obviously become the clarified butter, and the fire would be a vagina. So in that way, you're still doing the ritual. It's not about the sex that you're doing. It's about doing the ritual using sex. All right, sexualization of ritual, not ritualization of sex. Put that on a t-shirt. Okay, so I've got some key terms for you about Tantra that Andre Padu wrote about, and that'll give us some vocabulary, and I'll talk about them a little bit more. All right, so mantra, spoken spells or ritual invocations I talked about before. Sometimes they have a semantic meaning. They mean something. Like if I say Om Namah Shivaya, Om Namah Shivaya, Om Namah Shivaya, Om Namah Shivaya, that means Om, I bow to Shiva. Om, I bow to Shiva. Or the Gayatri mantra, Om Bhurabhuva Swaha Tatsavito Varehinyam Bhargo Devasthi Dhyo Na Prachodayata. So that's an invocation to the sun and the atmosphere, and I'm asking for wisdom and sort of goodness to fulfill my daily life. So that has a meaning. But in tantras, you'll find a lot of texts that are what are called bija mantras. Bija just means seeds. They're non-semantic. So you'll be like, Om, Hrim, Shrim, Krim, Klim, Krim, Krom, Klam, Klim. They have no meaning, but you'll repeat them over and over again, because the mantras themselves not only have power by speaking them, but in especially these mantras, the mantras are thought to be alive. And those very syllables like Hrim and Shrim and Krim are thought to actually be deities within the mantra. So you're speaking the deities. All right, nyasa. Nyasa means installment. Here, you install mantras or seed syllables on parts of the body. Look at the picture. You'll see Yo, Ma, Ta, Ra, Gova, Om. Oh, yeah, here we go. Om, Bu, Buva, Swa, Tat, Sa, Vi, Tu, Varehen, Yam, Bargo, Di, Mahi, Dyo, Yo, Na, Pracho. So that's the Gayatri is in there, actually. And Pracho, Dai, Ata. Yeah. Well, that's fun. I didn't notice that picture before. So in that, Om, Bu, Buva, Swa, Tat, Sa, Vi, Tu, Varehen, Yam, Bargo, Devasthi Dhyo, Mahi, Dyo, Yo, Na, Pracho, Dai, At. That is being the very syllables Om, Bu, Buva, Swa, Tat, Sa, Vi, Tu, Va, Re, Hen, Yam, Bargo, Te, Va, Sya. I'm using the wrong hand. Di, Ma, He. Oh, yeah. He, Pracho, Dayat. Yeah, okay. Sorry, I just figured that out. That was really cool. Okay, so in nyasa, you're putting these mantras or seed syllables on your body for healing, to heal parts of the body, to protect you, and what's called a kavacha, which is like an armor of mantras that one installs in one body, to purify that part of the body. Om Bhur Bhuva Swat, like each part that you touch and you put the mantra there purifies you and getting you ready for the ritual. And you can also worship deities by doing this. Often this is accompanied by speaking the mantra and using a hand gesture. It's often like this, or 2 fingers, sometimes 3 fingers, as you install them. It's not random. There's actual rules. Like as I was going through there and you saw me rambling and doing this, you can see that there's a specific order where you put these syllables, and that dictates what they do. All right, mudra. A mudra just means a seal, not like a barking seal, but a seal, like a seal that if you were to seal a letter. So a seal or a hand gesture, these are used in ritual and in meditation. And remember that meditation in Tantra is all actually considered ritual, and meditation can be worship. In fact, the word mudra can also be used to refer to the sexual union that is done in ritual. So when the bodies come together, it's considered a mudra. Yantra. Yantra is a word that actually means machine, but so like in Sanskrit, I could refer to my car as a yantra. So it means machine, but a yantra is also a mystical diagram. These are used to visualize the body of the deity. Once again, these yantras that are often made up of what you see as petals and triangles, petals and lotuses, are actually they are the deity themselves. So they're used to visualize the body of the deity, or you can make them and use them like amulets for magical spells. Related to this is the term mandala that you might have heard, which actually just means a circle or a space where one does rituals. All of these things are stuff that start in Tantra and that you see throughout the Tantras, and then you can find in other places, like in mainstream Hinduism today. Kundalini, the coiled one, the coiled serpent that is also a goddess. She's coiled up around the Muladhara chakra, the base chakra, and through ritual worship, through the enlightenment of the guru, through mantra practice, you awaken the coiled serpent that moves up the body and through the head, progressively liberating you throughout that existence. Now, there is an interesting thing that we were reading about, and I was intrigued by this, that there's a group called the Nat Siddhas. So this is a group of yogis, and they have these big thick earrings, like right behind here. They both wear them on. I've hung out with these guys a little bit. They were thought in the 14th century to have actually created yoga. Their first guru was Matsyendranath, the Lord of the Fishes. You see him on the right. And then his disciple, Gorakhnath, you'll see in the center, started an order of monks and yogis who created Hatha Yoga, they claim, and also practice these Kundalini practices. So this idea of Kundalini doesn't come out of nowhere. It's before Hatha Yoga, but really gets picked up by these early Hatha Yoga characters called the Nats. So here's a picture of them today. In fact, there's a prominent politician in the sort of north central India named Yogi Adityanath, and he is considered, and he is a Nath yogi. So these guys are not just counterculture figures and yogis, but some of them are big politicians. You can spot them by the horn they wear around their neck, a specific and the big earrings that they have, and they almost always wear that saffron color as well. And Nat just means Lord. Okay, so back to Tantra. So it was a historical thing where I talked about some actual people for a second. The tantric body, or visualized inner body structure. This is the physical spiritual body that is characterized by flows, or nadis, of energy, or prana, containing wheels or energy centers, chakras, you've heard about chakras quite a bit, and laks, or bandha. So the idea is you have energy flowing through you all the time in different channels. Those channels come together in basic energy centers, and those centers are called chakras. Chakra just means wheel within the body, within the visualized body. Now, one can use what they call laks or bandha in the stomach, and like by moving your body around or whatnot, that is thought to manipulate and push those energies around. Meditation and ritual in Tantra seeks to manipulate prana, this life force. The more energy you have and the more it flows, the greater the spiritual liberation, or the greater the power one will achieve. Folk often call this the subtle body, but in Sanskrit literature, the Sukshma Sharira is the body that goes from life to life. So it's almost like the subtle body is also like the soul in a way. It's your soul you can interact with and manipulate with. This understanding of the subtle body is identical to what we see later in Hatha Yoga. Hatha Yoga, as we've seen, is the violent exertion that evolved along with Tantra. It is a physical type of religious practice performed by ascetics. Mostly it is meditation, a few asanas held for a long period of time to manipulate the body. It's only somewhat related to the 20th century. All right, let's look at a little history for a second here. So here we're going to look at early Tantra and two types of figures, one called the Kapalika, the skull bearer, and another called a yogini, a female yogi, or maybe something much darker. All right. So, Tantra can be divided into two distinct stages. One is the earlier, but the second doesn't replace the first. So this earlier stage of the Kapalikas does not replace the second stage of domestic householders, more anesthetized, sort of more calm Tantra done by householders and not crazy renunciates. Okay. So the two eras are represented by two types of practitioners. So the first practitioner I want to talk about are the skull-bearing Kapalikas. Kapalika just means one who holds a skull. They wander around cremation grounds, and they hang around in places that are dangerous, ambivalent, or impure, and they're there seeking power. All the while that they're hanging out in cremation grounds and in scary places and lonely trees and deserted temples, they're invoking and calling down animal-headed witches called yoginis. So they interact with these female witches called yoginis, and there's an elephant-headed one there. And here is, I can't remember what her head is, but This one has an elephant head. And then the picture below there is at Haranyapur or Yogini temple in eastern India, where there are 64 beautiful little images of these yoginis. You'll notice that at that temple there's no roof on it. Why? Because the yoginis come down out of the sky if you call them up. So what are they doing with these yoginis, with these witches? So the Kapalikas would interact with these witches by making offerings and sometimes having sexual interactions with them. They would consume commingled sexual fluids from intercourse, and the woman would usually be menstruating at the time. And once they have sex with these women, they would that substance, their commingled substances, would become a potent nectar that creates magic powers, longevity, immortality, and maybe liberation. These guys, the Kapalikas, and all of them were guys, are renunciates. So who are they doing these practices with? Sometimes it was obviously visualized. From the text, it just says that these yoginis sweep in out of nowhere. So maybe elephant-headed, bull-headed, cobra-headed women just showed up and they could do their thing with them. Or most likely there were temple courtesans or prostitutes and sex workers who were hired to perform these rituals with these Kapalikas, who could also be yogis. So yogini really is, it's a female word for yogin. It means female yogi, but nobody until recently would call themselves a yogini. So when I talk to people who do modern postural yoga who are women, they say, I'm a yogini. I go, yeah, look out. I don't want you to sweep down out of the sky. Wendy Doniger beautifully wrote about these yoginis that you have to be really careful with them. If they show up and they think of you as their darling, you're good. If you're afraid and you don't treat them right, or you don't greet them right, or you don't do the ritual right, well, you're not going to be their darling. You're going to be their dinner. They will kill you. There's a lot of discussion about how people who worship these yoginis improperly and they end up being murdered by them. Now, the Kapalikas were not actually there's not like a clan of Kapalikas like the Napt orders are. Kapalikas was a mode of religiosity. People would take a vow to wear ash and carry a skull and whatnot. And many religious groups would do this. One of my professors, David White, would say, just because somebody rides a Harley Davidson doesn't make them a Hell's Angel. But some of them are. Okay, so I like to think of these Kapalikas as the pan-Indian cult of exorcistic visionaries. They would go to scary places. They would try to get themselves possessed by deities and gain power from that. They would also deal in depossession and exorcism of other people who were afflicted by these deities. All right, so there is another group. This is the second group. So I talked about the Kapalikas. The second group are like the so-called household or grihastha tantrikas. So if the past one was hardcore tantra with actual sexual rituals and scary deities and whatnot, this is softcore tantra. These fellows will use symbolism. They'll use all the symbolism of the Kapalikas, but they internalize the practices. So instead of having ritualized sex, they will envision ritualized sex. Instead of drinking wine and eating meat, they'll visualize drinking wine and eating meat. They will internally summon these yoginis and install them in their body and interact with them in a visualized way. Sometimes they may consume dangerous substances physically, but usually they visualize those substances. What was physically and aggressively performed amongst the Kapalikas is reduced to ritual and visualization. This became a really popular mode of Tantra, but it has a much lower buy-in. It's not that hard. You just get initiated and you do it. You don't have to go out and hang out on the cremation ground for a week and try to get an animal-headed witch to come down and give you magical powers. The yoginis in time stop being even referred to as witch goddesses, but are considered the rays of cognition. They're considered to live within your body at all times, and your senses and your rays of cognition. Remember how the senses go out in Sankhya and touch things and come back? The very senses are thought to be yoginis in this household version of Tantra. I call this deodorized Tantra. In this sense, it was acceptable because all of the tantric technologies could still be used and all the symbolism could still be used, but without doing the more troubling aspects physically. All right, and I'm going to talk about meditative rituals and sexual rituals here. Then I'm going to talk about Neo-tantra. So meditative ritual. We read in Padu, starting on page 79, about a guy named Abhinavagupta, and his name is fantastic. So Padu writes about a meditative ritual that Abhinavagupta wrote about in the 10th century, and he was living in far up northern India in Kashmir. Abhinavagupta proposed a non-dualist philosophy aimed toward living in a constant meditative state in which all the world is pure consciousness and all action becomes ritual. He also proposed and performs lots of rituals. Tantra without ritual is not Tantra, as I've said before. So let's look at this preliminary ritual that Padu describes from 77 to 79. The first thing one does, the first thing the yogi, the sadhaka, one who does the discipline, the first thing they do is they perform nyasa. That's putting the mantras on the body. That purifies the physical body. And then the body is visualized. And this is kind of a really cool ritual that he describes. The body is visualized burning up, the absolute ashes. The body dissolves and is burned up and fuses with Shiva and Shakti. Then that body that one is still in but has visualized fused with Shiva and Shakti is worshipped. And the consciousness within the body is thought to be Shiva. The next thing one does is they visualize a trident, like a pitchfork, going up the center of the body. You can see the picture here. Anyway, sorry, 1 second. So one begins visualizing this trident, and the handle is at the base of the body, and then the trident is thought to go on the top of his head. Directly above the head, sort of right on the trident, is visualized the very corpse of Shiva, the god Shiva, but he's dead. And then above that corpse are the three prongs, and there are three goddesses there. Those goddesses are thought to be Kala Samkarshini, which is the fire that is thought to consume the universe at the end of time. Through this practice, one gains insight that all of the body is the universe and that consciousness is cosmic. So the insight here is that visualization, mantra, multiple deities, all ascending forward, moves to make one identical with the deity. So imagine visualizing this every day. Well, let's talk about some sex. All right, so sexual rituals. Tantra really gets started with the sexual rituals. The sexual rituals in the 6th century kind of really make Tantra what it is. This is the hardcore Tantra in which yogi heroes sport with yoginis to gain those potent sexual substances that will confer magical powers. Now, tantric sexual rituals were performed in a less dangerous but still physical manner. What do I mean by that? So we had the Kapalikas. They're out on the cremation ground, trying to find those witch goddesses, have sex with them, and then like boom, 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 get the magic powers. So here we're going to talk about a ritual that is done in a temple or a holy space, and it's less dangerous. You're not in a cremation ground in the middle of the night. So these rituals are less dangerous, but they're still really done physically. They're not visualized. While there will be visualization within them, they're acted out physically. Some basic rituals involve yoni worship, so that's a worship of a vagina, in which the yogi will worship his consort, his sexual partner, as a goddess physically, and then he copulates with her to gather and consume the sexual fluids. Those fluids are thought to be the essence of the god and the goddess channeled through physical bodies. Now, going back to Andre Padu, he describes a ritual by Abhinavagupta from on pages 90 to 95 that I'm going to run through with you right here. So Abhinavagupta describes an elaborate sexualized ritual that is representative of many tantric principles. So here we go. First, the practitioner must be a perfect hero. His kundalini is active and awakened. He has powerful mental focus. He is in full control of his sexuality. He is a master. Now, there will be an orgasm in this ritual, but that orgasm must happen at a very specific time. And the ritual isn't about sexual pleasure. So his consort is said that she also has to be of firm mind. She has to have a very clear mind. But they don't really say that much about her. Go figure. Another sexual ritual where the dude, it's constantly described, and the lady, not so much. So the setting for doing this ritual is a well-adorned and decorated place. The practitioner should consecrate everything and the whole space with mantras and lay out a special cloth. All the while, he's visualizing himself as a god and he's chanting mantras. He's visualizing himself as Shiva. He finds his lady. He holds her close and he worships her. He worships her as a goddess. And he holds her close, and steadily they begin to alter their consciousnesses through initial kissing and fondling, dissolving the body into bliss. So they slowly build up their sexual energies. And as their sexual desires and energies and sensations happen, it's thought that they are dissolving themselves so that nothing is left except the pure experience. Next, because at this point he's just kissing and fondling and they're hanging out. Next, he worships her yoni, her vagina, and he enters her. And they commingle their sexual fluids, passing them back and forth. The woman should be menstruating. So semen and vagina, copulation continues, churning all about. All right. A child who's born from this type of tantric ritual is thought to be very special. And in fact, this Abhinavagupta, whom I'm presenting right now, was thought to be actually born from one of these rituals. Next, they mix these powerful fluids with alcohol, with booze, with liquor, and they offer it ritually to all of the deities, and then they consume it themselves. This is thought to be a powerful substance that is identical to pure consciousness. This is called a nectar or amrit. This nectar does a few things. One, it's transgressive. These are substances you're not supposed to be drinking. But it's also a powerful substance, a substance that grants powers. Those substances are also thought to be considered the bodies and consciousnesses of those deities. And all these practices, it's thought that the people doing them are rising to be gods. The gods don't come down to them. You rise up to the gods. And then finally, as the ritual is over, they rest in bliss, in the sense of ananda and bliss after their ritual. Finally, after their rest and bliss, they conclude with a long japa or mantra repetition. They do another round of yoni worship and another sexual union in which the minds and powers of the practitioners unite and interpenetrate, and they fuse with the consciousness of the divine. It is thought that this ritual will cause liberation while living, jivan mukti. This is a long, involved, and meditative ritual. There's no description of orgasm in meditation. They'll talk about fluids, but they don't talk about orgasm. This is not you're dissolving your brain into the sexual experience. There's a lot of stuff going on. The goal is gaining those powerful substances and maintaining meditation and expanding consciousness. The female position or experience is never described. It's all from a male perspective. So, which is different, as we'll see in Neotantra. So while this ritual is said to bring liberation, the vast majority of sexual rituals are to gain supernatural powers. Furthermore, the sex rituals are not prominent in most tantras. People will say that, the sex is the important thing in tantra, but you start reading a lot of tantras and it's not usually as big of a deal as other rituals. So other sexual rites outside of this one have no emission or orgasm. It's thought that you do very long sexual practices, but if you have an orgasm, male, it's considered a failure. The semen must be saved and transmuted up the spine, as we've seen over and over and over again. Now, last part, Neo-tantra. What is sex magic? So in the colonial era, the British started, so when the British had the colony in India, the British depicted tantra as being all about transgressive sex and black magic, or as just degenerate hedonism. And there is sex, and there is black magic, but mostly it's very elaborate ritual worships. So what is Neo-tantra or New Tantra? Well, starting in the late 19th and 20th century, a wide range of Europeans and Americans began to experiment with sexual experiences leading to Gnostic experience, sex leading to insights into the nature of the self and the soul. These were usually in the context of marriage. So it was usually thought to be done between a man and a wife, at least by a character that you see on the right named Pascal Beverly Randolph, who is amazing. Pascal Beverly Randolph was half black at the time that he lived, and he wrote a bunch of manuals for husbands and wives to perform almost sexual meditations with no knowledge of Tantra whatsoever in order to gain closer connection to themselves and to God and to gain insights into the nature of reality. Other people extended this idea. In Western sex magic, when people talk about sex magic, the argument in Western sex magic is at the time of orgasm, one focuses one's brain on something very specific and tries to manifest that will in the world that's turbocharged by the orgasm. So the mental focus is thought to change the self and the world and is propelled forward into action through orgasm. This is not found anywhere in Indic traditions, but as we will see, a lot of people think about these types of ideas and think of them as Tantra, but they're not Tantra at all. So as the 20th century passed, many folks started to think about psychosexual healing and sexual liberation. So healing, mental healing, physical healing through sexual actions, and the idea of sexual liberation, taking sex and being able to use it however one so wants and not just limiting it to marriage or between a man and a woman. So at this time, a lot of these thinkers looked at early translations of tantras and depictions of deities sort of having sex together and argued that these Asian artifacts were representative of sex magic and free love. This form of Neo-tantra can still be encountered widely on the internet and in sort of counterculture Western groups. So what's my point here? My point is that people in the West, does this sound like yoga a little bit, were doing their own thing with sex. Then they saw something that reminded them a little bit from India. And then they said, oh, what we're doing must be the same as what they're doing. And that means what we're doing is now granted a pedigree of being ancient and from India. And because it's Eastern, remember Romanticism, because it's Eastern, it must be true and it must be powerful. So they layered Western ideas about sex and sexuality onto a non-Western context, and then took that non-Western context and said that it justified exactly what they were doing. There's a circular logic there. So contemporary Neo-tantra or New Tantra is cloaked in the East, but it's really a Western project masquerading as Asian. As we talk a little bit more about Neo-tantra, I think you'll struggle to find any of the concepts that I've discussed today in Tantra to be in the discourse of Neo-tantra. In Tantra, you will not find resolution of sexual trauma. You will not find working through psychological issues or repairing, your painful relationship with family members, and you will not make all of the interactions you have with the world into sexual ones. In Indian Tantra, you won't see anything about multiple orgasms. But if you talk to people who are into Neo-tantra, it's all about finding, having a 1 hour long orgasm or having extensive multiple orgasms that will shatter one's brain and give you a Gnostic vision of the world. Or, there's a couple of Neo-tantra people that I know that talk about when they masturbate, they imagine they're making love to the entire world. And in their moment of orgasm, they connect with the mother goddess of the earth. None of that's in India. None of that is actual Tantra. But they'll bald-faced tell you, oh, this is Tantra. So you will not find resolutions of sexual trauma, filling the consciousness with erotic bliss, extending mutual sexual pleasure, multiple orgasms, or making all interactions with the world into sexual ones. Neo-tantra folk will talk vaguely about liberation or enlightenment, but these ideas are never developed, and they don't resemble any discourse in India. So let me tell you a very quick story before I finish up. I was in Southern California. I was in Santa Barbara, and I was having dinner at this couple's house. And somebody was saying, the woman said, oh, I've been very busy. She's like, oh, what? Oh, I'm with my recording project. So I said, oh, what are you recording? I was like, oh, what are you recording? She says, oh, I've been making a guided meditation CD for prostate massage. And then they're like, oh, yeah. And I'm like, I don't want to hear about this. And I got talking to her husband, who's also like a massage therapist and also probably a very wealthy weirdo. And he was talking about prostate massage too. And so I'm like, you guys called this Tantra? And they're like, yeah. And this dude pounds his fist on the table because I was like, well, this is Tantra and that's whatnot. And I was like, this isn't, what you're doing is not looking like anything in India. And this guy just bam, 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 pounds his hand on the table, says, I'm so glad you're saying this because Tantra doesn't come from India. It comes from Marin County, California. And I'm like, oh my God. And that little interaction, there was so telling. In fact, this California Tantra is properly from California, but it keeps calling itself Tantra to make itself more legitimate. It's fine if people want to do this. Have your 1 million hour orgasm, sleep with whatever, visualize you're making love to the earth. Oh, that's fine. Just, it's not Tantra. I mean, in fact, it's offensive to Hindus and it's offensive to people that practice Tantra, in fact, because you're saying that this holy thing that they do is the same as, you having a really long orgasm with a partner that you really like. So it's offensive. I mean, imagine if somebody came through your church and started talking about the practices that they were going to teach the entire community that were the secret sexual rituals between Mary Magdalene and Jesus, and also said at the same time that these are the same practices that nuns and priests are constantly doing in secret. Just imagine. It's fine. Be a kinky weirdo. Be a, do sexual healing. Help people through sexual meditations and whatnot. Just don't call it Tantra, because when you're calling it Tantra, you're running roughshod over other people's religions that they happen to think are very important. All right. That was Tantra. I'll talk to you next time.